Hey everybody, this is Throbby with LargeLads, and today we have a extra special video. It is going to be our first full comprehensive review for a game. I've been wanting to do reviews for a long time now. This is a long-form, complete breakdown of Europa Universalis V. I have well over 100 hours. In the title it says 100 hours. I have 175. I wouldn't say I'm the most knowledgeable, greatest EU5 player in the world, but I have tons and tons and tons of knowledge, more than enough to do a full, complete, comprehensive review of all of the systems. I also have over 1,000 hours in Europa Universalis IV, so I can compare it to that, and I play all of the Paradox games extensively. I've been wanting to do reviews for a long time now, and I think this is the perfect place to start. It is right in my wheelhouse. Here on the channel, if you're new, we talk about RPG games, we talk about strategy games, we talk about management games. Every once in a while, we'll do a roguelike game, and I think this is the perfect game for me to start on. So we're going to jump right into our Europa Universalis V comprehensive review. Right before we get started, please like, comment, and subscribe on this video. The likes are huge. We just got monetized, so please subscribe. We can't do it without you guys. I appreciate all the support you've given me so far, and I'm hoping to pay it back as much as I can and give you guys as much good content as possible. So please, like, it's huge. Like the video. While you're there, hit the subscribe button and drop a comment. Let me know the next game you want me to review. Let me know what you thought of this review. And without any further ado, let's jump right into the review. Europa Universalis V is a grand strategy game developed by Paradox Tinto and published by Paradox Interactive. It's a sequel to a 2013 game, Europa Universalis IV. The game was officially announced on 8 May 2025 and released on 4 November 2025. Europa Universalis supports single-player, multiplayer, and cooperative play, and with Paradox games, it is imperative that we talk about the launch. Paradox is notorious for having rough, shaky launches, releasing games with not enough content, or in buggy states. In this case, I'm happy to report that Europa Universalis V, released in a great state, is probably one of Paradox's best launches in years. The game was not buggy, barring a few multiplayer desyncs here and there, and without any DLC, Europa Universalis V is content-rich and very flavorful. As I said, I have 175 hours in this game, and there's not even a single piece of DLC. If you're not a huge Paradox fan, you might not know, Paradox's policy generally is that they release games with very good frames and build upon them over time with DLC. In the case of Europa Universalis V, the frame is very good and doesn't really even need any DLC to be viable. Past releases, such as Crusader Kings 3, were very shallow on release and absolutely needed DLC to bolster them. The reason I'm so high on Europa Universalis V so far is I imagine down the line, when DLC is applied, how great the game can be. Overall, from Paradox's standards, I'm very impressed with this launch. The launch state still needs some balance, some tuning, and some bug fixes, and additional content and flavor will always be welcome. Europa Universalis V's map and world design work very well, sporting the largest map of any Paradox series with the most countries and the most individual provinces. Players can choose from any nation state throughout the entire world that exists in the initial start date of 1337. Unlike other Paradox games, Europa Universalis V only has one start date, that being 1337. Europe and the Middle East are the densest, most fleshed out locations, but there's many states in India and Southeast Asia. There's many African tribes to choose from on the West African coast and around the Ethiopia area, but anywhere south of that is lacking in tribal nations. One of my only issues is the Americas. Europa Universalis V has a very dense Mesoamerica, but if you zoom out, the rest of the Americas is bare, barring some interesting nations in the Andes Mountains. Artistically and graphically, the base Europa Universalis map is a political map, but once you zoom in, the map converts from a political overlay to a terrain map mode. Cities dynamically display buildings that are in them, and province resources can be seen as well. Rivers and mountains are easily distinguishable, and overall the map and world design are very appealing to the eye. Europa Universalis also has over 50 map modes that display tons of information, more than you would ever need. I'm very happy with the approach that Paradox took when it comes to map and world design. When it comes to the economy and population of Europa Universalis V, there's a lot we can talk about. For starters, the trade system. EU5 has completely upgraded and overhauled Europa Universalis IV's trade system. Trade nodes are dynamic, frequently change in size, shape, and even new markets are created and some old markets are destroyed. Each market has its own surpluses and needs, and food stockpiles. Different factors such as your trade efficiency, production efficiency, market attraction, trade range, trade capacity, trade maintenance, and trade advantage all factor into how much your nation will make in its trade node and the size of your trade node. The trade node will satisfy all of the pops in its respective area. Trading with other nodes can introduce goods that are unavailable in your own, or trading your own surpluses out into other trade nodes can generate profit. The trading system is deep and complex and can be a lot of fun to toy around with. Population and tax base is another way you make money in Europa Universalis V. All of these states can be taxed differently, adding modifiers to the estate's satisfaction. Depending on your nation's laws, different estates can be taxed more, less, or not at all. The tax bases generally coincide with population and control. Control is a new system in Europa Universalis V. It kind of coincides with autonomy in Europa Universalis IV, but in this case, your control is what percent of a province's resources, gold, or value is going to the crown. Your capital will almost always be at 100, and the proximity to your capital, at least early on, is generally going to determine what the control of the different areas will be. Certain modifiers like happiness, culture, proximity, crown power, and prosperity can all play a role in province control. Buildings and goods are divided into two systems. Buildings are examples of building types and locations. Buildings have a wide variety of different functions, from increasing supply of manufactured goods to unlocking unique unit types. Their efficiency is based on how many pops are currently employed there. Most buildings have upfront construction costs and ducats, and thereafter place additional demand upon certain goods in the location's market. Goods, on the other hand, also called RGOs, can be raw goods that are farmed, gathered, mined, logged, or hunted for, or produce goods which are primarily created in towns and cities. The food raw good is converted to food. Your pops will survive on food. Without food, your armies will suffer attrition and pops will suffer starvation. Food raw materials are the primary source of food. Generally speaking, buildings in Europa Universalis V are satisfying to create and best to centralize in your capital or large cities with high control. RGOs, at least early on, seem to do the most for your market in a decentralized capacity. Sure, building in your capital is great, but building the best resources seems to be more important. Food, on the other hand, is very important, especially in nations that don't construct enough. The cost of food can send poor nations into debt, and selling food is very profitable. One of my favorite features is hitting the population map mode. It's really satisfying to see all of the different populations and where they're migrating to and from. Trying to make the biggest super city you can is always one of my favorite ways to play. Playing tall in Europa Universalis V is one of my favorite ways to play. It's way more satisfying than it was in Europa Universalis IV. Seeing your population tick up is a real treat. One of the big additions to Europa Universalis V is the pops. Every single citizen of your nation is completely simulated now. Gone are the arbitrary development stats, and in are unique dynamic pops that change throughout the game. Clicking on a nation will tell you exactly the population of the nation, and clicking on the demographics tab will show you the unique demographics of the people of your nation. Warfare and armies have been completely overhauled as well. Your armies now consist of regulars and levies. Levies are directly attributed to your pops. Larger populations equal larger levies. But levies are much worse than regulars. Regulars are your professional military. Regulars can be hired and will consume your manpower as maintenance. This system is really good at separating powerful nations from weaker nations. Nations that will play quantity or quality. When going to war, you will raise your levies. Your levies will spawn throughout your nation and be ready for war. So far, the system works really well for me, and I thoroughly enjoy it. I think it captures the historic realism of warfare at the time and the composition of armies. Navies work the same way. You'll have naval levies and ships that you've built. Important things to watch out for are keeping your army's morale high. Moving your armies for long periods of time will lower the morale. Your army units are comprised of 3 fronts and a reserve. Losing all of the units in one of your fronts will result in being flanked. The army and army management system is not too complex and probably exactly where we'd want it to be. Occupying areas is exactly the same as it is in Europa Universalis IV, and sieging forts is about the same. Overall, one of the few issues that I have with warfare and armies is the stack wiping can seem a bit arbitrary at times, as well as the propensity to get fort locked, which is basically getting locked in an area behind a fort, unable for your army to move. When this happens, you generally are also not getting food supplied to your army, resulting in your army starving until your siege is complete. But I look at that as a bug and something that will be fixed later. EU5 handles technology and progression with the Advances and Ages systems. Advances being the traditional techs, all of them giving you different bonuses or unlocking new buildings, troop types, or anything in between. Different cultures and religions will have different advances that are unique to them. The Ages systems will provide you with new advances to unlock. Every 100 years, a new age will start. Every age will have 3 institutions, and those institutions will spread for different reasons. For instance, the New World institution will spread to nations who have used the Explore mechanic. In this case, using the Explore mechanic will open up your nation to spawning the New World institution. Once the New World institution spawns, it will slowly spread. It can spawn multiple times and will generally spread slowly. Once the institution has spread through 20% of your nation, you can embrace it. This will cost gold and stability. Embracing this institution will unlock new advances that stem from that institution and are generally theme appropriate. For instance, the New World institution will open up advances all relating to exploration and the New World. Things such as native policies, different types of ships, trade range, exploration costs, etc. At the start of each age, you will get to pick a focus. Each focus gives you unique advances that you'll be locked out of once you pick. This is a very good spin on EU4's institutions, which just gave flat research penalties if they weren't embraced. The Advances and Ages system is one of my favorite changes that they made to the Europa formula. National identity and flavor. While each nation you play feels different based on its location, one of the areas this game comes up short is actual national identity. In Europa Universalis V, every nation felt completely distinct and different with their mission system. The mission system in EU4 laid out different missions and milestones to help direct your nation's playthrough. These missions were always grounded in historical realism and guided nations to follow a more historical path. Europa Universalis V has done away with this system, leading to a bit of ambiguity on the best way to play your nation. And along with that ambiguity, we're missing historical flavor, which in my opinion leads to staler playthroughs. Paradox has tried to supplement this system with unique national events, but it's just not the same. Overall, I would say different nations feel different enough to be satisfying. Neighboring HRE states can feel exactly the same, but nations with more contrast, such as playing as Castile versus playing Muscovy, feel completely different. Overall, I'm happy, but there's a lot of room for improvement here. Diplomacy in EU5 is okay, but has plenty of room for improvement. Things like declaring rivals, royal marriages, and alliances are all here just like they were in EU4. Royal marriages are slightly deeper now that your ruling family feels a little bit more important, and you don't just ally every nation you royal marry. Royal marriages are more to keep your royal family strong and going than they are, let me just royal marry all of my allies. You have the ability to automate diplomacy, but I wouldn't recommend it. One of the best quality of life features was automating improving relations, and that is no longer in, and it's sorely missed. Diplomacy could use a lot of work and quality of life features, but we do like the international organizations. Generally speaking, major nations are more fun to play than minor nations. Right now, countries with more unique events and national bonuses are simply far more flavorful and engaging. That said, balancing is still rough. The AI is extremely aggressive and major nations tend to blob quickly, often swallowing smaller neighbors early. This can make some minor nations feel unforgiving or short-lived. Where EU5 really shines is how it scales over time. Each playthrough gets better the longer you play. This is a big contrast to EU4, where the early game often felt like the most enjoyable part. In EU5, the later mechanics, technological advances, and larger standing armies demand more attention, but they're also far more rewarding to manage. As a historical sandbox, EU5 might be the best we've ever seen. Both blobbing and playing tall are not only viable, but equally satisfying in their own ways. The replayability here is huge. I've completed multiple campaigns, both single player and multiplayer, and every run has felt unique and engaging. With future DLC in mind, I can easily see myself putting well over 1,000 hours into this game. When EU5 was announced, a lot of us were genuinely worried about the UI, and early impressions didn't exactly calm those fears. Over time though, it has grown on me. It's not the most visually appealing interface I've seen, but it fits the game well enough. Once you're playing, you actively stop noticing it. Where the UI really struggles is how information is organized and assessed. You often have to cycle through multiple pages of low priority or situational information just to reach menus you rely on constantly. That friction adds up, especially during moments where you need to make quick decisions. Some of the information pop-ups are also problematic. If you dismiss one by accident, finding that same information again can feel almost impossible, even when it's something important or time-sensitive. The hover tooltip doesn't always help either. While it's clearly designated to teach complex mechanics, it can be finicky in practice. You'll often find yourself chaining together tooltip after tooltip trying to piece together how a single system works, which can be more overwhelming than helpful. That said, the audio design does deserve credit. The sound effects are clean, satisfying, and do a good job at reinforcing actions and feedback, even when the UI itself feels cluttered. For new players, this game is undeniably an uphill battle, between learning entire new, deeply layered systems and navigating an AI that offers very little breathing room. EU5 makes few concessions for beginners. It's rewarding once things click, but getting to that point requires patience and commitment. The AI in EU5 can really be broken down into two distinct areas: how AI nations behave diplomatically, and how they perform once a war actually begins. Both systems are deeply important to the overall experience, and both are currently very uneven. Starting with warfare, the AI behaves in a way that will feel familiar to anyone who's played the previous Paradox titles. In most situations, it attempts to solve problems simply by throwing soldiers at them. There's very little situational awareness when it comes to manpower preservation, attrition, or long-term sustainability. Armies are often committed repeatedly into losing battles or poorly supplied fronts, with little regard for long-term consequences. Because of this, most wars, even against nations that are technically stronger on paper, are usually very winnable if you play cautiously. The AI will burn through most of its manpower far faster than the human player, and once that happens, the rest of the war becomes a slow but inevitable cleanup. That undercuts a lot of the tension that should exist in mid to late game conflicts. Allied AI behavior only compounds the problem. Allies frequently prioritize strange or seemingly random targets, even when there's an obvious war goal that would quickly end the conflict. You'll often see allies wandering off to siege irrelevant provinces or chase minor enemy stacks while the main front collapses. Wars that should be decisive with proper ally coordination can instead turn into frustrating defeats due to completely nonsensical decision-making. That's where frustration really sets in. The AI clearly needs significant work, but it's one of the areas I don't realistically expect Paradox to ever fully solve the problem. AI warfare issues are deeply rooted across nearly every Paradox grand strategy game and go far beyond the scope of EU5 itself. These aren't simple balance tweaks, they're fundamental AI limitations. As it stands, the AI in warfare is serviceable at best and rage-quit worthy at worst, especially when you're relying on allies to pull their weight. Diplomatically, the AI is in a very different place, largely because it's still undergoing frequent and visible tuning. At launch, the AI was almost comically passive. Nations refused to start wars, borders barely shifted, and entire centuries could pass with very little meaningful changes on the world map. The result was stagnant, lifeless game states that actively fought against the idea of EU as a dynamic historical sandbox. In response, Paradox began adjusting aggression levels, and over several patches, the pendulum has swung hard in the opposite direction. The AI is extremely aggressive, often declaring wars on smaller neighbors as soon as truces expire. While this does succeed in creating a more dynamic and active world, it introduces a new problem: uncontrolled blobbing. What tends to happen is that one or two major powers, most often France and Bohemia, begin absorbing smaller neighbors at an alarming rate. Once these nations reach critical mass, they become nearly impossible to stop, even with massive coalitions formed against them. The diplomatic system simply can't apply enough pressure to meaningfully slow their expansions. That said, I'm more forgiving when it comes to AI diplomacy than AI warfare. Paradox is clearly iterating the system patch by patch, and these are the kind of problems that realistically can't be solved without long-term testing at scale. Community data, edge cases, and thousands of hours of player feedback are probably the best way to get this tuned properly. So while diplomatic AI is far from perfect, I'm willing to give EU5 some breathing room here. This is an evolving system, and unlike warfare AI, I genuinely believe Paradox can improve over time. EU5 performs incredibly well, and honestly it runs better than I expected it to at launch. General navigation around the map feels smooth and responsive, and the transition between fully zoomed out strategic view and more detailed close-up map is seamless. You're rarely fighting the camera, the map, or the controls, which matters a lot in a game where clarity and readability are constant priorities. Even in the late game, performance holds up surprisingly well. There is some slowdown, but far less pronounced than what we've seen in other Paradox titles like Stellaris or Hearts of Iron. Long campaigns remain playable and responsive. That alone makes extended sessions much more enjoyable. Bugs do exist as expected. Naval army movement can be frustrating at times, and small situational issues occasionally pop up during normal play. However, in my experience, none of these problems have been severe enough to disrupt a campaign or force a restart. They're noticeable but not consequential. Outside of the occasional multiplayer desync, EU5 has been remarkably stable. On my higher-end machine, the game runs smoothly for hours at a time without crashes or major performance drops. Overall, performance and stability are two areas where EU5 genuinely surprised me. And for Paradox launch, that's no small achievement. So how does Europa Universalis V actually compare to its predecessor? Honestly, it's a harder question to answer than it sounds. If we're comparing EU5 to the base version of Europa Universalis IV, then EU5 wildly outperforms it. Many of the most criticized arbitrary systems from EU4, things like development clicking and abstract mana points, are completely gone. In their place are systems that feel more grounded, more systemic, and far more in line with the kind of historical simulation that Europa Universalis has always aspired to be. Visually, the map in EU5 is a clear step forward. It's more readable, more detailed, and more alive without becoming cluttered. Trade is also far more advanced, shifting away from rigid, predetermined flows towards systems that feel more dynamic and reactive to what's happening in the world. EU5 also introduces several new mechanics that add long-missing historical context. Systems like control and distinction between regular armies and levies do a much better job at representing how states actually function and fought during this period. These aren't just mechanical changes, they meaningfully alter how you think about expansion, warfare, and state power. That said, EU5 is not a straight upgrade in every way. The omission of certain systems, most notably the mission tree, is felt immediately. While mission trees in EU4 were often criticized for being too gamey or railroady, they also added a huge amount of flavor and direction to individual nations. Their absence in EU5 makes some countries feel less guided and at times less distinct, especially for players who enjoy the structured progression. Where EU4 still undeniably shines is the sheer depth of content built-up over the years of DLC. Entire mechanics, layers, and complexity of nation-specific systems simply don't exist in EU5 yet. And that's not really a criticism so much as an unavoidable reality. EU5 is competing against a game that's had over a decade of post-launch support. Right now, EU5 feels broader and more systemic, while EU4 feels deeper and more specialized. EU4 is a towering pile of interlocking systems refined over time. EU4, by contrast, feels like a cleaner foundation, one that prioritizes cohesion and long-term scalability over immediate mechanical density. And that's really the key difference. EU5 feels like a game built with the next 10 years in mind. Over a few major patches and several DLC down the road, it's easy to imagine EU5 surpassing EU4 not just mechanically, but philosophically. The core design is stronger, the systems are less arbitrary, and the historical simulation is more convincing across the board. Because of that, I genuinely believe EU5 will eventually dethrone EU4's Paradox's masterpiece. It's not there yet, but the foundation is absolutely in place. Alright, before we get to my final verdict, I want to take a step back and talk about the game's overall strengths and weaknesses, and what I see as EU5's biggest highlights and where it clearly stumbles. Starting with the positives, this game genuinely feels like an amalgamation of Paradox's best ideas across their entire catalog. You can feel the influence from multiple titles at once. There's the deep population and economic management you'd expect from Victoria 3, the internal politics and state-level roleplay reminiscent of Crusader Kings 3, and many of the best structural elements that made Europa Universalis IV so enduring. Personally, I'm a huge fan of the make number go higher style of gameplay, and EU5 absolutely nails that feeling. Playing tall is genuinely rewarding. I can sit down for hours and just watch my economy grow, my population expand, and my systems become more efficient, and that alone keeps me engaged in a way very few strategy games manage to pull off. One of my favorite changes by far is the new trade system. For the first time, it really feels like I can bend the world around my market. My economy feels shaped by the land that I control and the resources I provide, and the decisions that I make, not by rigid, predefined trade routes. In EU4, markets often felt restrictive, and the predetermined nature of trade nodes was always a limitation. EU5 has completely addressed that issue. My market actually feels unique, reactive, and personal to my nation. And finally, as a historical sandbox, there's simply nothing else like this at scale. The time span alone, from 1337 all the way to 1820, is staggering. It's the deepest, longest historical simulation Paradox has ever attempted. All of my favorite eras are represented. The High Medieval period, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment. Being able to experience that entire arc in one single cohesive simulation is incredibly compelling. That said, EU5 has some real issues. The biggest one, without question, is that nations can feel far too similar. And unfortunately, it's hard to avoid pointing out the same culprit: the complete omission of the mission system. While EU5 does introduce nation events and bonuses, they don't come close to fully replacing what missions provided. One of the biggest strengths of missions wasn't just flavor, it was historical logic. In EU4, missions gave nations direction. Portugal colonized because it made sense. Hungary resisted the Ottomans because that was its historical role. Poland pushed east because that aligned with geopolitical reality. Missions didn't force you down a path, but they rewarded you doing things that felt natural for your nation. And in doing so, they made you feel like you were actually playing that nation. In EU5, that sense of direction is largely gone. Take Portugal as example. In theory, you should colonize because you're the closest to the New World. But in practice, colonization isn't particularly rewarding right now, so why bother? There's no additional incentive beyond the baseline mechanic. And that problem extends to almost every nation. Why stop the Ottomans as Hungary? Why expand east as Poland? Without missions, the motivation simply isn't there in the same way. The satisfaction of completing missions, the steady sense of progress and identity, is something EU5 has lost, and the game feels noticeably emptier without. My other major issue is the AI. In warfare, it behaves poorly, as it usually does in Paradox games, and diplomatically, major nations often feel like unstoppable steamrollers right from the start. Smaller nations struggle to survive, and once a major power starts rolling, it can feel almost impossibly meaningful to check their growth. These issues don't ruin the game, but they do hold it back from reaching its full potential. My final verdict on Europa Universalis V is a strong 9.2 out of 10. This is an outstanding game, and I absolutely recommend it to anybody remotely interested in grand strategy. Despite a few clear issues, EU5 delivers a masterful experience built on an incredibly solid foundation. The core systems are deep, interconnected, and far less arbitrary than what came before, making the game both rewarding and more engaging over long play sessions. What really stands out is just how well positioned EU5 is for the future. This game is designed to be built upon and iterated on over the next decade. With continued patches, balance updates, and future DLC, it has the potential to grow into something truly special, and possibly one day be remembered as the pinnacle of grand strategy. Even in its current state, EU5 is a confident step forward for Paradox. It's ambitious, deeply satisfying, and incredibly easy to recommend. Anybody who made it to this point, thank you so much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what games you want me to review, and let me know what you thought of the video. And always, have a great day.